Okay, welcome everyone. I'd like to first acknowledge the traditional owners, the people of the Kulin Nation and their elders past and present. Looks fascinating to see Dominic's presentation. We've had a similar piece of experimentation in public policy making with community engagement, where we did a citizen jury at the City of Melbourne to work up our first ever 10-year financial plan. Now this is a precursor. We claim at the City of Melbourne that we are the most open and transparent local council in Australia. Some of the things we've done are things like we've fully disclosed our lease register, our individual land valuations, we disclose the contracts of our top 6 executives, start date, end date, what they're paid, etc., etc. We have a conflicts of interest register on the website. Every time a councillor declares a conflict of interest for a political donation, it's on the register on the website. Quarterly disclosure of all expenses, public pre-approval of all interstate international travel, things like that. So we also try and have very transparent decision making with all tenders done in open session. Public questions at the beginning and the end of every committee meeting, so that's twice a month. We have unscripted oral public questions, no warning, no notice. Audio of all council meetings and committee meetings. All submissions from the community are placed on the website, so they're online so we can see what everyone else is saying. And we allow the community to participate in every single resolution at committee. So they can submit 10 times in the one night on all different planning applications if they wish, and then their submission is on the website as audio and a written submission on the website for everyone to see. We've still got a few things to do in transparency. We've got to work up a 10-year capital works program with detail, so you can see the individual projects. What are we spending in 2021-22, for instance? We need to be more open and transparent with our enterprise agreement. I'd love to do a citizen jury on that. There's never been one done in Australia on enterprise agreements. And I'd love to get councillors to admit how many free tickets we get to events. My colleagues have been very agreeable so far on transparency, but that's the one where I'm 1 out of 11. So I'll have to do that one just before the next election and embarrass them into admitting that we should disclose all free tickets that we receive to events, because there's quite a lot of them. So the authorising environment for our first citizen jury is we have a community engagement framework, we have a council plan with 8 goals in there, council values, and then our vision statement to be bold, inspirational and sustainable. And it was at the start of the last council that we did put in that aim to be Australia's most open and transparent council. In terms of our 10-year financial plan, we didn't have one. So it was the great thing about this was that citizen juries, as Dominic was saying, you've got to give real power. You can't just make a decision and then ask for retrospective approval. You've got to put a decision on the line and let the community really decide. So we had never done a 10-year financial plan. And so we said, because we're doing it for the first time, let's let the community have the first go. And this was one of the best things about it, because there was no officer defence of the status quo. There was no councillor defence, because there was no policy at all. In fact, there was very little transparency. We just did our 1-year budget each year. We had a bit of a 4-year forward estimates thing, but it wasn't very detailed. So this was a new piece of disclosure and forward planning. And we said, well, why not get the community in? Rather than do the New York model of let's let them decide, $2 million worth of grants in a ward. That's sort of the easy, put a small bit of money on the table and then let the community talk about a few visible projects like a new park and these sort of things. That's easy, but we thought, let's go for something very complex. And so we picked something complex, and you can see from this slide, there's some very big numbers in terms of a budget. Our budget's about $430 million a year. We've got $4.5 billion of assets, 1,200 staff. So we've got to spend $700 million on open space in the next 10 years. We're going to spend $250 million on the Queen Victoria Market, the world's biggest open air market, 18 acres here, just a few hundred metres down the road. How are we going to fund it and not jack the rates up too much? Yes, we're over dependent on car parking, $100 million a year we make on car parking, but this is going to fall. So we need to diversify our revenue sources. So here are a few of the drivers of our 10-year financial plan. In the last financial year, City of Melbourne, would you believe it, had the fastest growing population of any council area in Australia out of 560 councils. So massive density, massive apartment approvals, great, very strong immigration. We're one of the world's 4 biggest cities for international students, along with London, New York and Paris. So just this amazing growth. and how as we, as the Capital City Council, are we going to manage this and finance this. So Sydney talks about, 20 hectares at Barangaroo. We've got, a couple of hundred hectares of urban renewal space when you combine Fisherman's Bend and Arden Macaulay and the rest of Docklands. So we've got a lot of infill, former industrial areas where we're going to have a lot of density, a lot of growth, and we've got to manage this, and we've got to manage the finances around it. So the citizen jury was this, as you can see on the screen. How do we remain? And the Economist has declared we're the world's most livable city for the last 4 years. How do we retain that title? And then more specifically, we put on the table that we were $900 million short in terms of our long-term projections of delivering infrastructure. Now that was a very contentious number because the Lord Mayor came in and said, you've been snowed. Panel, I don't believe that number. The officers have snowed you. So it was pretty controversial, and that was the great thing about it. The officers had to come up with a position. Previously, no one had said what was the infrastructure shortfall because no one had ever asked. We said 10-year plan, 43 ordinary punters, tell them what you think the shortfall is. So the officers had to bury their way in their spreadsheets and come up with a number. The Lord Mayor then said that was rubbish, and the debate was on for young and old. And it elicited so much new information, the fact that we had this jury who were deciding what policies to set for the 10 years. So it was a very comprehensive engagement process. We had pop-ups, we had surveys, we had budget simulators. So we did a whole bunch of engagement before we impaneled our 43 panellists. And then how do we select them? We said we'll have 50% from our business electoral franchise and 50% from our residential electoral franchise. Now, in hindsight, the category that we omitted was the 700,000 people who visit the city every day. So the workers, the international visitors, we didn't actually give them a say. So maybe that was why many of the recommendations were very anti-car, because we didn't actually have anyone on the panel who was driving in, stuck in traffic on the panel. We went for our voting franchise, which is people, residential and business, who could vote. We ensured that we had good diversity, so we engaged with the universities to make sure we got lots of students in there, because 42% of the residents in the City of Melbourne are students, and so it's a very, very big cohort for us. And we went for geographic diversity, business, residential diversity, age diversity, and obviously gender diversity as well. Here's a picture, as you can see, a very diverse group of people, and they did a magnificent job for us. So I mentioned about the online budget simulator and the funnel approach we had, where we presented the panel with a lot of research and feedback from what the community was already saying about our financial challenges before they even sat down. There's an image of our online simulator where people could move the dial to say, let's spend more on events and less on community services. That gave us some very interesting feedback, which we gave into the panel. And then we were assisted by the New Democracy Foundation, which is funded by Luca Belgiorno-Nettis, one of the founders of Transfield. He's put about $5 million into this, and he basically believes the political system is broken and juries is the way to make public policy. And I have to say, after going through our experience, I agree with him on that. There's a massive trust deficit for us in power, and the community thinks we're all hopeless and conflicted and corrupt. And it's a wonderful system to actually get a jury randomly selected, no usual suspects, no squeaky wheels, banging on, knowing which buttons to push, no privileged rent seekers. So genuinely randomly selected. But the key thing is that fourth point, 6 full Saturdays. And they were all sunny Saturdays too. These people committed. We thought we'd be down to 30 by the end, and we still had 43 at the end. They loved the fact that there was real policy on the line. They loved the fact that they could choose the topics. So they said, we want to hear about demography. So we got Bernard Salt to speak. We want to hear more about climate change. So Professor Graham Pearman from Monash University came and spoke. So after the initial presentations from the officers, the panel then chose what they wanted to hear. They said, we want to hear from the planning minister. They picked the topics, and we lost control. And we couldn't even sit in on the deliberative processes, so only New Democracy was in there. So the residents' groups were up in arms. They came to watch a few sessions, and they were saying, why can't we observe? And they said, no, like a jury, no outside influences. So the media could come to some sessions, but not to the deliberative sessions. So we had to explain, council's a very complex beast, and there's 5 key service streams, so we had to explain all these things we do. It was such a huge task to get the community with no start-off knowledge to understand the full complexity and diversity of a capital city council. And in hindsight, it was probably almost too big a challenge in terms of getting people up to speed with all the information of what the council does. And then we had to deliver them rates modelling, and as I mentioned there, we had the climate experts coming in and how we measure infrastructure spending. So it was very, very diverse, and we all learnt so much from this amazing dump and first-time disclosure of all this new information. Now, the panel made 11 recommendations. We had a special committee meeting to receive the panel report, and then we agreed to consider it thoroughly, and we adopted our first ever 10-year plan on June 30 this year, and we embedded the full panel report in our 10-year financial plan, and we made the officers explain, if not, why not, as to whether we were implementing particular recommendations. Now, the panel was delighted because there was a very strong adherence in the 10-year plan to their recommendations. So I wanted to sell Citywide, our services company that we own. You know, it's quite a big business, 200 million in revenues. They just said no, so I said, all right, I'll give up. We're not going to privatise Citywide. Thank you, panel, you have spoken. We're reviewing our property portfolio. We're cranking up our developer contributions. Sydney's been making 100 million a year from developers. We've probably made 50 million in 20 years. So we're severely under-taxing the developers. And so we've now doubled, effectively, the revenue we're getting from open space contributions from developers. And that would have been resisted by the Liberals and a few others, but because the panel said, you're undercooking it, go for it, that went through unanimously a few weeks after the panel made that recommendation. So they have delivered real influential outcomes. You know, we're cranking up our spending on renewables and on sustainability because they said we should do it, and we're going after car parking because they said, you know, we're too reliant on car parking, get more cars out of the city. So, you know, 2 weeks after they said that, we immediately said, righto, 20 free car bays for motorcycles. Just convert them and just cop the revenue loss. And I was able to get that one through, pointing to the panel, saying this is what the panel said. We got great media. The media loved it. We've had probably 5 or 6 pieces on Radio National now on our panel, and The Age has done a big feature on it. Yes, some of the media, the tabloid media, the Herald Sun and 3AW, tried to attack it at first because they're privileged influencers as well. They like to be able to ring the Lord Mayor, and they like to be able to write editorials and tell the politicians how to behave. And the line that worked well was we said to them, look, we want people like your listeners on 3RW, Ross and John. We want your listeners. We want Herald Sun readers, real people, telling us what to do. And that tended to neutralise the councillors cannot even do their job, councillors outsourcing their job, which was a bit of a line that ran, and certainly was what Julia Gillard got smashed over when she tried to do a citizens' jury on climate change just before the 2010 election, and that was an absolute debacle because she got slaughtered because she was copping out on a policy position where Labor was fully invested and then tried to outsource it to a panel. So finally, we did some University of Melbourne research with the panellists. They are now our biggest advocates. They go around telling people how great the City of Melbourne is. They say that, you know, they're very satisfied with democracy at the City Council. 1/3 of them say they're a lot more interested in politics. New Democracy has told us that on average 1/3 of participants in citizen juries end up then volunteering for something else because they've been engaged, they've been civilly stimulated. People love to volunteer, not only because they get a gold embossed invitation from the Lord Mayor that looks like a royal wedding invitation, but they love the fact that it's a finite commitment. You're not secretary of the tennis club for life. You are volunteering for 5 or 6 Saturdays, and then you can get on with your life. There's no ongoing commitment. So we were surprised that 700 of the 7,000 people we randomly wrote back and said, yes, we'll give you 5 or 6 Saturdays, even though you're going to pay us under award wages of $500 for the whole 5 days. So, you know, and that finite contribution was very important with that. And then for local government, I think it's just great. You know, we've got to be more transparent. We've got to have more easy access to information. I think we should do more of these citizen juries for vexed policy decisions where there are trade-offs. It's great for trade-off decisions. And I'd love to do one on our enterprise agreement, which is 99 pages and has 1,041 clauses. But, you know, the usual, you can't talk about that sort of thing has come down there, so I've had no joy getting that one up. The challenge with the citizen jury is to do it in a scaled way and keep the cost down per project. So we spent $182,000 on ours. We'd love to roll them out at short notice on various issues, but it is very face-to-face, it is very intensive and time-consuming and quite costly. So that's one of the challenges for the model. You can't do them all the time because of the cost. It would be great to get some sort of a model that can be scaled at reasonable cost, but I'm a huge fan of it in an era of massive loss of trust. And panels have been tried all over Australia and they genuinely get it right. It's so rare for a panel after a deep dive to come out with a stupid recommendation. It's amazing how smart the community is. When you randomly select them, you have 75% supermajority requirements and nothing gets up unless it's a super. And you put a real decision on the line. And it's amazing how smart they are. So huge fan of it and would recommend all of you in all your levels of government embrace using citizen juries as a policy decision-making tool. Yes, you've got to give up some power. Yes, it's a risk, but from our experience, it worked an absolute treat. Thanks very much.